This meeting is being recorded.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Emily Garfinkel. I'm joining us from a black box today as I'm using a computer that does not have a functioning camera, so my apologies. But I wanted to welcome all of you for coming today to this colleague circle hosted by Kathy Krugel-Varda of Conservation Connection. So just a few quick things before I pass it over. This meeting is being recorded and it will be available on our YouTube channel afterwards. I will be sending a follow-up email as well afterwards to everybody registered, so they will have access to the recording, the transcript of the chat, as well as the resources and links that we talk about in today's presentation. And one final quick thing too, if you do have questions during this program, feel free to drop them in the chat and we will do a Q&A address at the end of the presentation. So if you have anything that you think of during the presentation, feel free to drop it in there. And I think I touched on everything. So without further ado, I will pass it over to you, Kathy. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily, and thank you to the Connecticut League of History Organizations for hosting this colleague circle for us today. I don't know about the rest of you, but I think we're really so fortunate to have the League know how to connect all of us to talk and share about our projects. And so when Conservation Connection and the Connecticut State Historical Records Advisory Board launched this latest project, we of course reached out to them and they were gracious enough to agree to not only help distribute the information, but also to host this colleague circle. So before I get into talking to you more about this specific project, the Subject Guide project, I'd like to introduce Lizette Pelletier, Connecticut State Archivist and the coordinator of the State Historical Records Advisory Board, to say a few words. Lizette. You're muted.
Sorry about that. So as I started to say, thank you very much. I just realized I haven't figured out how to put my new phone system on mute or do not disturb. So I apologize in advance if the phone rings. During the United States Bicentennial Celebration, the National Historical Publications and Records Commission, which is known as the NHPRC for those who aren't familiar with them, and they're affiliated with the National Archives, created state and territorial historical records advisory boards as part of its records grant programs. The NHPRC supports a variety of activities to preserve, publish, and encourage the use of documentary resources necessary for the study and appreciation of American history. And in light of the bicentennial, to support the rights of people and democracy. And so the SHRABs are created as part of a national effort to save and make accessible these resources at the state and local level. So the Connecticut State Historical Records Advisory Board is a 19-member board. It's appointed by the governor and represents records creators, records managers, users, and repositories that hold historical records. There's only two requirements to be on the board. First, at least half of the members have to be practicing archivists. And then secondly, anyone nominated for membership must really care about preserving Connecticut's historical records. And our membership has nothing to do with political affiliation. NHPRC funded records project help to identify and preserve archival records found in private and public institutions. Since the 1970s, NHPRC has awarded $2.7 million in records grants to numerous Connecticut repositories. Originally, having a SHRAB was a prerequisite for Connecticut to be able to receive NHPRC funding. That's no longer true. The board has kind of evolved from there. We don't do so much with reviewing federal grants, but we are more, because we are now able to apply for our own grants, We're into planning and information gathering, education, training through workshops and webinars, and which a number of you have participated in recent years. And then to provide education to local and regional historical societies, museums, public libraries, and other institutions that are interested in caring for their own archival records. And then finally, we have most recently been able to offer re-grants using NHPRC funds to pass that on to institutions that have participated in our programs. The Connecticut SHRAB has received, and Kathy, it's 9 board grants, 6 of which have been in collaboration with Conservation Connecticut. Each of these grants that we've had aims to educate and assist staff and volunteers at historical societies, museums, and other cultural heritage institutions to properly care for the archival materials using best practices. We've conscientiously built upon each grant upon the previous grant to improve the skill level at these institutions. And when we were discussing where to go with this current grant, the board was aware of the need to address areas that hadn't been previously or not traditionally looked at within the institutions. So we were looking to address the stories of traditionally excluded voices. This finding aid project is, or the subject guide project is one way that we thought we could improve access to these records. Another way is that we are working with a pilot project with hopefully 3 historically significant African-American churches here in Connecticut in identifying and preserving their collections, and then doing some additional training in addition to the finding aid, project, which I'm going to turn over to Kathy to explain. So thanks for coming and hearing about our program.
Thank you so much, Lizette. So let's get right to what it is that we launched in the middle of last week, and that we hope you will all be as excited as we are about doing this. So as Lizette mentioned, the National Historical Publications and Records Commission, which is the granting arm of the National Archive, provided this grant to Conservation Connection, which is me, and the State Historical Records Advisory Board. And so we are launching what is basically a 2-part project to provide access to what we would identify as traditionally excluded voices. So right now I'm going to share my screen so you can see the website. Give me 1 minute to get there. I'm sorry, give me 1 second. I must have closed it by accident. Okay, something is going on with the website, and I apologize for that. So Lizette is going to pop the link into the chat so you guys can all see it and save it and open it on your own computers. So what we are doing is a statewide survey to collect information on resources in archives throughout Connecticut that document the experiences and the representations of African Americans, Native Americans, and other people of color from the colonial era to the present. Now, the survey is going to collect information found in archives. So let's remember, for anyone who's more new to this topic, archives are any paper-based collections. They're not your 3-dimensional objects. And what we're looking for is material that may or may not be in finding aids. It depends on how your collections are arranged. But what we're looking to do is reveal the stories, the experiences, and the history of these traditionally excluded voices. You might find these materials in your museums, historical societies. They can be in local history collections at your public libraries, community and ethnic archives, church archives, and more. So for the survey, we are asking people who fill it out to think about what they have seen in their own archives or what they believe they have found in these paper-based collections that tell the story of people of color in their community. Now, you might find these in manuscripts or books and other printed and published materials. Maybe you have graphics such as handbills and postcards, photographs, account books from local businesses, religious and community records, genealogy and family history papers. If you have any town records that are deposited with you, probate or inventory records, and microfilm. For example, if you have any town records and in your archive, okay, if you have any land records, for example, very often land records, deeds is where you might find manumissions filed in Connecticut. If you are storing your town's vital records, the births of enslaved children are recorded in town vital records in the 18th and early 19th century. So that information could be found in there. Now for the survey, we're asking very specific questions about your collection. We want to know what subject matters regarding people of color may be in your archive. So this is everything from enslaved people, enslavers, abolition, people of color in military records that you may have. These are just some of the examples. And what we want to know is, where are these resources in your archives? Are they do you have a lot of business papers? Are you a maritime location and you have ship logs? You know, often there could be information there. We want to know what records you have that document the people in your community, and if any of these records may have been digitized. We are also asking to know, because we know all of us, when we work in a town, work in an area, we start finding out what other people in our region have in their collections, and whether they're a museum or not, if they're a church, if they're a town hall, if they're a collector. If you know of anyone in your area that has records pertaining to people of color, there's a place on the survey where you can share that information. It's like the best way that you can refer, well, here's what I know about my collection, but I've also heard or I've seen that there's something in this collection that you may want to take a look at. Now, for anyone who completes the survey, we are offering, this is funded by the NHPRC, we're going to be able to provide 10 site visits by the traveling archivist to these institutions. It's going to be a 1 or 2 day site visit, and the traveling archivist will come out, and based on the information you provided in your survey, we are going to be able to create what we're calling subject guides. So, you know, traditionally in an archive, we create finding aids, which guides us to the materials in a particular collection. So if George Washington, if you have the papers of George Washington, lucky for you, but then this finding aid would tell us, oh, here's his military records, here's his letters to Martha, here's his receipts, okay? What we're doing with this subject guide is creating something similar, but this is pulling information from a variety of sources in your archive. So it could be in photographs. You might mention what's in your postcard collection. If you have you know, oftentimes there's like a house file. What are the historic houses in the community? Who were the historic homeowners? Well, if you know if any of them were enslavers, if you know of any houses in your community that were owned by African Americans, Native Americans, other people of color, this is how we can come out to your site. We can look at the things you reference and indicate in your survey, and then we can create this subject guide. Now, the completed subject guide, we're very fortunate. Brian Stevens is with us today, who is the director of Connecticut's Archive Online, which provides access to all the finding aids that get added to it that are in Connecticut. Is a terrific resource for researching what's in Connecticut's archives. And he's been gracious enough to agree to work with us. Brian is a member of SHRAB and also a member of our Traveling Archivist team, and we're going to be working to upload these subject guides into Connecticut Archive Online so people can find them, to make them discoverable. We're also recognizing that the material that's being shared by all of you in this survey is really the first time all of this information is being brought together in one place. And so Mike Kamizis, who runs the partnerships at Connecticut Humanities and also participates in SHRAB, we're talking about how this information can kind of, how do we share that information with all of you? Let you know how your collection compares to others. What do we know about the African American experience, the Native American experience, and other people of color as those records pertain to what's in our archives throughout Connecticut? So we're also looking down the road of how we continue to make this material useful. Lizette and I have a strong track record that, well, we have funding for 10 site visits, 10 subject guides and visits from the Traveling Archivist. We often figure out ways of stretching that money. So there may be opportunities to do a second round, add some more there. So I would encourage all of you at the very end of the survey is where you can indicate if you'd like to work on a subject guide with the Traveling Archivist. If you're not sure, check yes anyway and leave, and let me know, email me, call me, and we could talk about why you might be unsure or what additional questions you may have. But we're here to make this available to as many people as we can, to collect as much data that we can then share back with all of you. And I think it's going to be a really valuable product and product for all of us to use and to know what's out there. Part of what this is when we talked about providing access to traditionally excluded voices. We pretty much can say that the majority of our archives and our repositories in the state were probably donated by early families, traditionally white families, and that families of color may not feel that their histories are reflected at your institutions. But by doing this project and by creating the subject guides, we can help people in your communities feel that they're represented, that their stories, whether they're immigrants, whether they're people of color, however they arrived in your towns, that their stories are there and that they can relate to the people who have lived here in the past and the hurdles that they overcame. So I want to just really make sure that when you think of your archives, I very often hear, and one of the reasons we're doing this project, all of us with SHRAB and the Traveling Archivist, hear from people, oh, there's nothing in my collection. I think there's a very, very strong chance that there's something in all of your collections of all the people who are here participating today. And it's about, it's not as hard as finding a needle in a haystack. It's about knowing where to look and where to start that looking and digging. But that's where you are such a valuable part. If you say, oh, yeah, I know we have a receipt about a child being sold. Oh, we have these probate inventories and there's some enslaved people mentioned. Or we had an abolitionist in town who gave John Brown a run for his money. Those are the things that we're looking to document and to know where to find them. One thing that hopefully this year will work since the website wasn't cooperating. Yes, this will work. If you are unclear about what this will look like or what kind of materials we're talking about, the Connecticut Historical Society has had for quite a number of years on their website this page, African American Resources at the Connecticut Historical Society. Now for this guide, and this is primarily a subject guide, they are identifying both materials in their museum collection, so you can see the heading museum objects, which I point out, but the vast majority of the material are from their archives. And we're not going to be focusing on museum objects at this point, but this is an example of actually printed materials. Let's go to manuscripts. That's a little easy. So here you can see a series of letters. It identifies what collection they're from, how many pages, what's the date, and it just gives a sentence or two of why this letter is in this resource. And you can see that either it talks about the abolition of slavery or the fugitive slave law or other records and things of that nature. So if you're not sure of what we're kind of looking at, what we're talking about, I would say going to this resource at Connecticut Historical Society could help answer some of those questions. I'm, of course, here and happy to answer any emails or questions you have about whether or not a record or a material fits the criteria of this survey, and I'm happy to talk to you about any of that. There is a deadline, you know, this is a grant. They like to see us produce things in a timely fashion. So if you wanted to complete the survey in time so that you would be eligible for the site visit by the traveling archivist, you need to complete that survey by June 9th. So there's plenty of time. I know it's very busy time in Connecticut because there are grants dropping left and right, and I manage Museum Makeover and the Collections Assessment Grant and these projects with Connecticut SHRAB. So I understand, but we try to make the survey as painless, pain-free as possible. Most of the information on there should be things that if you're familiar with your institution, you should be able to do relatively easily. You might have to talk to a couple people for some answers, maybe even poke around in your archive a bit, but we tried to make it a rather easy survey to complete. So that's the information I have. If you just going to move some more of this stuff over on my screen. If you go to the Conservation Connection website, which I think Lizette has posted.
No, Linda posted. Thank you very much.
Okay, Linda posted the CH. Oh, okay, she did. I don't see the Linda one yet. Okay. If you go to the Conservation Connection website, you can find all the information about the survey, the link to the survey. As soon as Emily has posted the recording of this, that will be on the website as well. And that's the page you can go to keep getting updates on the program. The CHS link is also there, so you can look at that resource. I'm not saying that's exactly how the subject guides will look in the end, but I just wanted you to know that that's available if you're trying to think, well, what do these descriptions mean? What kind of materials are we looking for? So that's what I have to share. Lizette, we also have Linda Hocking on the call, who's also a member of SHRAB and on this advisory board, as well as Brian. Do any of you have anything you want to add at this point before we open the floor to questions? I guess they don't have anything to add because they didn't say anything. Okay, so I noticed there's a couple of questions in the chat from Carol Evans. Do the documents need to be digitized already? And is there money? So this is not a digitization project. We ask in the survey if they're digitized, because that kind of just helps us understand what kind of access might be available for these materials. But no, nothing needs to be digitized. These are the hard copies that we're talking about that were donated and are in your archives that we're looking to survey. Yeah, well, I like Lizette's comment. It's also knowing what the needle looks like. Yes. Ramin, you put up a fabulous comment in the chat, and I know you've done so much work in this area down at Westport Historical Society. Could you talk a little bit about that with everyone?
Sure. So the short of it is, when I came to Westport Historical Society, now Westport Museum for History and Culture, our archives were in complete disarray. And we've been undergoing a multi-year project to get them in order, to catalog them, to create finding aids, the impetus of which was, in fact, first a Traveling Archivist grant that Kathy helped us with. And so our historical record, because of all the things that Kathy described, right? It's a very old town. The founding families were, for the most part, enslavers, or if they weren't enslavers, they benefited, like much of the state, with complicity to the trade, right? They were trading, provisioning farms and so on, trading goods with the West Indies. And we have, when I first got here, I was told we don't have anything. We don't have anything about slavery. We don't have anything about early African-American history in Westport. We don't have anything on Indigenous people. And little by little, in terms of doing this cataloging, this very rich record has shown up. So we have, through our own archives, been able to do exhibits on Black history in Westport, on including Indigenous history wherever we can in exhibits, on immigrant history, and we continue to do this over the last 6 years. So just recently, we produced an exhibit almost entirely based on the archival record, about an early Black family, a free family in the mid-19th century, who built an enormous kind of multi-generational legacy, including finding the descendants because of archival material and archival research. And so what I post in the chat, for those of you who haven't seen it, if anyone would like to come see this exhibit at Westport, please come contact me. My email is executivedirector@westporthistory.org. Happy to give you complimentary admission as colleagues. Just email me, I'll let them know at the front desk, and then you can take a look at this exhibit and see what you can really do. And Kathy's and separately, I've been doing this kind of work for about 15 years, and I can tell you that you have something in your collection, you just don't know it.
Ramin, thank you so much. I think that was such a fabulous salesmanship on the value of how archives can really support exhibitions and the stories we want to tell in our historic houses, temporary and permanent exhibit. That is amazing. And you've been doing such good work. Thank you so much for that. All right, a couple more questions. Is there any plan to coordinate this with a site such as WorldCat? That's from Pauline. We haven't gotten to that stage yet. We have a lot of great opportunities between Connecticut's Archive Online and the Connecticut Digital Archive. We'll probably find at first stop will be a repository in Connecticut, but to be determined, and we will keep you up to date on that. Another question, I think it was from Michelle. Hold on. It was about the subject guides themselves and if they're going to be together. So each subject guide will be per institution. So if you are the Windsor Historical Society, that subject guide will be pertaining just to your collection. The survey information, we're looking, by filling out the Google form, we'll be able to kind of search and arrange some of the material that you provide. None of that information gets provided with or shared publicly without asking for your permission first, but it's something that we can use internally to plan for next grants and to figure out, well, what do we have here that's really key and important? So we will make sure anyone who participates in that knows about how we're looking to share or use this information going forward. But that is a really good point. I'm glad you brought that up. Okay, do the records have to be Connecticut specific? Well, that is, Elisa, you always bring me good questions that I hadn't thought about yet. Ideally, yes, but we also know that there are collections out there that, maybe I can actually think of one institution that had family members that moved to the South. And so not only did they have, in fact, the last enslaved person in this community was because the southern side of the family left an enslaved person to the Connecticut family. And so there's a bunch of documentation, much of it from the Deep South, about freeing this person and how best to go about that. So I think that's something we'll talk about on a case-by-case basis, but if it's relevant to your collection, then I would say, I guess some things are going to be from other places in Connecticut. From Rosemary, if we are not part of the subject guide visits, how will information provided in the survey be utilized and be helpful? Well, and that's what we're going to be working on once we see what the participation looks like, Rosemary. We may be able to take that information and make it searchable somewhere, or we may write a summary report or do a colleague circle like this. So if, for example, you are a community on the coast or on one of the major rivers and have ship captain logbooks, but don't know who else does, or you're the logbook, but you need the ship captain's records versus the builders, that might be the way to kind of bring these stories together and find out, you had a person who started in Enfield, but then somehow they ended up in Stamford. Where's the connection? And do these two areas have information? So stay tuned for that, because believe me, we don't like things sitting around getting dusty when we do these projects. Thank you, Remy, for your time today. The survey is open right now. There's a link in the chat. It'll be open through June 9th. And that June 9th is for people who want to participate in having a traveling archivist come out to do a site visit to create subject guides. But we'd like the surveys all in by then, but if a couple struggle in over the summer, that's okay. And there will be 10 visits total. Each of those 10 repositories will receive 1 to 2 days of visits. So once we know how many visits we need to do, we know how many more site visits we may or may not be able to do. Dennis began the Witness Zone project here in Guilford in 2017. Probate records, property records, birth, death notices are rich resources. Henry Whitfield Museum also has many random records as the first state museum in Connecticut. Catherine, excellent point. I can tell you the Henry Whitfield Museum, as a participant and member of the League's Connecticut Collections database, is working with us to fine-tune their finding aids and add them to Connecticut collections, because they do have really rich resources going back to circa 1900. But those property records and things like that, we're not reaching out to towns. We know that they have that material. We want to know what's ended up in our archives at this point. Let's see, I'm just scrolling through the questions. Lizette brings up a very good point that planning has started for America 250, and there may be other funders that would be interested in this information. One thing that in some of the conversations I've been part of for America 250 is, what can we do that we know now that we didn't know during the bicentennial? What stories are out there? What people and groups can we talk about more accurately and shine a light on showing just how diverse Connecticut society and these communities were at the time of the Revolution? So what you find out will help make a more well-rounded product, whether it's an exhibit, whether it's an article, whether it's how you interpret a historic house. All of this information, whether you use it immediately or 5 years from now, will have repercussions for you, but also for other states to have a better understanding. These have been great questions. Does anybody have any others or want to raise a hand? Lizette, did you want to add anything else as talking about, Melissa? 2 in-town churches also have records of the formerly enslaved and enslavers. We are working together on the Witness Stone project. Shall we reference what we know, what they have, or are these 2 churches a separate survey? So if you would not mind, I could do it also, but if you would ask these churches to do the survey, but on your own survey, there is a long paragraph answer where you can tell us that these materials are in these churches and what the name of the churches are. And even if you have an email, because if we can add them to the survey, more the better. So thank you for pointing that out. Essex, Melissa's in Essex, and Essex is chock full of good stuff. So I'm never surprised to find out, oh, by the way, we have that too. You know, there's always good stuff there. Did you want to add something, Lizette?
No, I don't have anything specific, but
Okay.
I'd like to thank everybody for coming out and listening and participating. And if you might have an interest in serving on the State Historical Records Advisory Board, we do have some openings. So just contact either Kathy or I. And Linda has something she wants to say.
Go ahead, Linda.
Okay, hopefully this works. I have an unstable connection. So I just thought it might be useful for folks to see what it looks like if you're using finding aids and you use controlled vocabulary. And what I mean by that is whenever you reference a subject within your finding aids, you use the same exact term. So I shared a link here just to show you if you look in our database, you'll see under African Americans, Connecticut, Litchfield, all of the different records that we have that pertain to that topic, or finding aids that have that topic listed. So if you were to participate in this project and end up with a subject guide and you put that information in something like Connecticut Archives Online, you could get something like this just by searching for the vocabulary term. So I just thought it might be helpful for people to see what it might look like.
Oh, thank you, Linda. That was a fabulous idea. I wish I had thought of that, but I'm glad you did. That's why you're here. The yin and yang of our brains, but that's an excellent way of getting to this information. This is where, since 2009, Conservation Connection has partnered with the state SHRAB to help all of you organize and provide better access to your archives, but also make them discoverable for yourselves. And also slowly but surely we'll get everybody's finding aids online and located that way. I did throw my email up there, cslconservationconnection@ct.gov. Don't blame me. It's the kind of emails that the state government creates without asking you. So sorry, it's a little wordy. Not my choice. I do other stuff, not that. Any other questions? Please just don't hesitate to reach out to me. If I don't know the answer, we'll definitely find people who do. Brian, do you want to mention the link you just put up?
Yeah, because Linda showed hers. No, no, but a similar search in Connecticut's Archives Online, using controlled vocabulary, that's a demonstration of what one should be aspiring to have their materials being discoverable in that form and at the push of a button.
And since this is Connecticut's Archive Online that Brian manages, that he's just shared, kind of gives you an idea of how your own papers and collections could appear on a search of just simply African Americans in this case. But I want to thank all of you for joining us today. It was fabulous to see you. I hope you will participate, because I think the outcomes are going to lead us in so many different directions. And I think it's going to be eye-opening for you, eye-opening for us, exciting to see what's out there. I think we all run into cases where people are still surprised what they can learn about slavery in the North, abolition in the North, history of people of color, and the challenges up here. Oh, the timeline, Elisa, very good. 1 year. So from the time that the grant starts, we're hoping we can finish your subject guide in 1 year, which should be doable, but also gives time to know that projects ebb and flow as tourism season comes and goes and school groups come and go. So you have 1 year to complete the subject guide. Emily, would you like to take it over and close us out for the afternoon?
Absolutely. Again, I apologize that my camera still does not work. But thank you so much, Kathy and Lizette, for hosting a great colleague circle. So I'll just wrap up by saying that the recording should be available this afternoon, and it will be emailed out to everybody, as well as the chat transcript and the resources and links talked about. So I'll just close and say thank you so much for joining us, and of course for being engaged with the League and the different programs that we offer. And I hope to see you all, and hopefully you'll see me next time at our next program. So thank you so much, everybody, and I'll stop the recording.
Thanks so much for your help today, Emily. Appreciate it as always. And thanks all of you for taking time out of your Monday afternoon.